Hi, good evening. My name is Ernie Paciorkowski. I'm a member of the Norwood Planning Board, and I was also the chairman of the MBTA 3A task force, which the town put together to work on the 3A as it applies to Norwood. So I'm sitting here with Sarah Dixon, who is the town planner and director of community development. How you doing, Sarah?
Good, thanks.
Good. So why don't you start off giving us a little background on what the 3A law or the MBTA Communities Act is and how it affects Norwood and what is Norwood's part in this statewide mandate.
Sure. So the Massachusetts State Legislature a few years ago passed this amendment to the Zoning Act. It's known as the MBTA Communities Act, or 3A. That law requires any municipality like ours that has MBTA transit access in it in the form of a subway or commuter rail, or a town that's adjacent to any such community, to create new zoning that would allow for multifamily housing to be developed as a matter of right. There's some basic requirements for this zoning district. It has to be of reasonable size, so for Norwood that's 50 acres. A certain percentage of it has to be within a half-mile radius of the train station. For us, that's 90% had to be located in that half-mile radius. It had to have minimum zoning of 15 units an acre density, and it had to be housing that was suitable for families with children. So cities and towns are not able to age restrict this zoning. And just a brief word on zoning generally, since it's kind of wonky and a lot of people don't have any need to even know what it is. Our zoning bylaw is the set of rules and regulations that govern what can be built where. It sets dimensional regulations for how tall buildings are or how close buildings can be together, how much parking we require. It talks about landscaping, and it also talks about uses. So which land uses can go near one another in certain districts. So this is a zoning act change. It requires us to pass new zoning. What it does not do is require any units of housing to actually be constructed, which is helpful as we kind of set forth on our mission to come into compliance with this new law.
So Norwood has 3 train stations. We have Norwood Depot, Norwood Central, and Windsor Gardens. So you mentioned 50 acres. Is it 50 acres per train station, which would be 150 acres, or is it 50 acres total? Maybe you could talk a little bit about how we have 3 stations, but how does that all work as far as the acreage and what Norwood is required to do?
Yeah, definitely. So we have to create a district that's minimum 50 acres, and that's total. So we can divide into sub-districts and locate this zoning in various spots around the town, provided that the total is 50 acres, and then none can be smaller than 5 acres. So you do have to meet kind of a minimum standard there. But it is important to note, you're right, we have 3 train stations in town, and so a half-mile radius drawn around all 3 of those gives us 860, I believe, acres to choose from. 50 is the minimum. It's important to note that of all the requirements we have to come into compliance with, 15 units an acre being minimum density, 50 acres being the minimum geographic size, and then our unit capacity, which is kind of a hypothetical build-out figure. Among those 3 criteria, in order to achieve all 3, you have to exceed the minimums in, at least 1, but really kind of 2 or more if you are trying to spread out your district. So.
And what is that unit capacity for Norwood?
So the unit capacity for Norwood is 2,047, which is a scary figure for a lot of people to hear. But, again, it's really not an expectation that 2,000 units of housing could actually be built. It's a hypothetical build-out calculation that just kind of puts all of your dimensional requirements into play and measures whether or not they result in something that's actually buildable. Mm-hmm. It assumes that every parcel within, let's say, 50 acres is raised, right, and cleared out completely. every parcel redeveloped for multifamily housing, and every parcel that's developed for multifamily housing being built to the maximum height, all the maximum dimensions and requirements. The number of units you could construct in that hypothetical scenario needs to be at least 2,047.
Because if I was looking at this, I'd say, okay, 15 units per acre, 50 acres,
Right.
that's 750 units. Well, that seems like it's easy to do, but that's not really the case, is it? It's minimum of 15, but it has to somehow show that you could possibly, if everything was
Right.
knocked down to the ground and rebuilt, you would have that. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that's exactly right. And while the state has given us these requirements, the design of our district and the design of our zoning is very much within our local control. We get to decide what this district looks like, and that's really significant because every municipality is going to be different. Even neighborhoods within a town are really different. Our 3 train station areas, right, those neighborhoods are fundamentally pretty different. And so this unit capacity, while we have to kind of spread it over an area that's at least 50 acres, we get to kind of mold it in a way that fits our own needs. So just for example, the proposed district that's before town meeting in March currently contains 78 affected acres. And a lot of folks are saying, well, that's so many, you only had to do 50.
Right.
Why on earth is anybody proposing 78? Well, we could have probably stuck to that 50, but you have to fit that unit capacity in there somewhere. So what that might have looked like then was much taller buildings, right? Or much less open space. Like we're requiring a certain percentage of every lot to be preserved as open space, as green space. If that weren't a priority of ours, or maintaining kind of modest building heights that fit in with the existing neighborhoods, those are big priorities. But if they weren't, we probably could have shrunk down the overall size. But since they are priorities of ours, the solution then was to spread that density over a wider area to result in buildings that, again, compatible with the existing neighborhoods, have plenty of space for green space, and reasonable setbacks so that not everything is built out to the, every lot line. So that's how we kind of arrive at a 78-acre district.
Was there an option for the town to not comply? Was this an optional state law that you could comply or not comply, or was this every town has to comply?
Every town that has MBTA access, so there's 177 cities and towns in eastern Massachusetts that are affected by this, and compliance with the law, it's never really a choice. And MBTA communities is no exception. Not only would non-compliance remove our eligibility for a lot of state funding, either in the form of grant programs, discretionary funding, some even routine funding of things like housing authorities has been a subject of contention, but the Attorney General has been very clear that if a city or town is non-compliant, then they would face legal action in form of the AG filing suit. The state also has the ability to, since cities and towns are effectively arms of the state, to come in and give us zoning, to kind of write that zoning for us. And really that would be unfortunate because we do have a fair amount of local control here to decide what this looks like. Again, how tall are the buildings? How much green space are we requiring? Are we requiring any affordable units? Where is it going to be located? All of this was a decision-making process that the task force and planning board and my department have been working on for 18 months now. It would be, I think, kind of a scary option to lose that control and potentially be subject to zoning from the AG's office that, they don't know Norwood as well as we do. So, compliance is something that is something that makes a lot of sense for the town.
Great. Could you bring us up like a timeline? I know that we started, it was close to a year and a half ago or whatever. Can you give us a kind of a timeline since this first came down and through the Board of Selectmen, we established a task force, and take us up to where we are now as far as what we've done, as far as compliance. I know we had to file something with the state about a year ago, and then any public outreach that we've done and public input, things like that. Can you just kind of bring us up to where we're at right now from where we started?
So in fall of 2022, the planning board appointed this task force to begin working on compliance. That task force, as you know, was comprised of residents at large, town staff, planning board representation, zoning board representation, and they began to meet in the fall of 2022. With the blessing of the Board of Selectmen, interim compliance with this law was achieved in January of 23, where we submitted an action plan to the state, essentially saying, yep, we're working on this, here's our plan to get where we need to be. And then the task force kicked off, really the most important part of this whole process. The task force felt very strongly that public engagement really needed to drive this thing. It couldn't just be a handful of us working in a room, writing down our own ideas, or even just basing it on the data that we have available to us about housing and trends in the population here. That it really had to be a comprehensive community engagement strategy. So that started last spring with public educational events. We did a lot on social media, using our website. We held an in-person Q&A event up at the senior center that was very well attended. And then, after that, we kind of transitioned to opportunities not to talk to people, but to hear from people. And so we held a series of small group discussions throughout the summer. And those were really well attended. I loved getting to meet a lot of people from town that I'd never met before and kind of hear their thoughts and ideas. We talked a lot about what Norwood's housing needs are and really got a chance to hear residents share some thoughtful and meaningful concerns that they have about the future of the town and how we could best come into compliance with this law and at the same time kind of meet some of the needs that people are experiencing. We had 5 of those. We held kind of community outreach sessions, tabling at town events. We co-hosted an event with the League of Women Voters that was extremely well attended. All in all, between that and a survey that was open for a few months in the summer, over 170 people participated in our community engagement, which was really fantastic. We got a lot of really great feedback. So we kind of looked at that feedback, reviewed it all. The task force kind of identified some themes. And even though obviously residents are not a monolith, nobody's going to have the exact same views and ideas, but there were themes that emerged. And we kind of honed in on those themes and tried to respond directly to those themes and kind of common concerns in the text of the bylaw. So really, the structure of the bylaw really materialized in large part due to the responses that we got from the public, which as a planner, I believe is how it should be. And I feel really proud of the work that the task force and the planning board has done to get to this point. So here we are. It's a month before special town meeting. It's March 21st. The planning board held its public hearing on these and voted unanimously to recommend approval to town meeting. It's been submitted to the Board of Selectmen, who have signed the warrant. So there's a handful of public information sessions between now and town meeting, and then town meeting will vote on this up or down.
So the ultimate, the planning board voted Monday night for a favorable recommendation.
That's right.
So the planning board, as an authoritative board, does not decide if this goes through or not, correct?
That's right.
We just recommend to town meeting a favorable or unfavorable recommendation. So the ultimate say on this will lie with town meeting, correct?
Absolutely, yep.
And that'll be in March.
Like any zoning change, usually it's the same process.
So one of the things in these public sessions that came out that I attended, Housing, the housing shortage, I mean, the state obviously identifies that there's a major housing shortage. They want people to be able to take commuter rails into Boston or out of Boston to get to work, less cars, less traffic. Of course, rents in Boston are just skyrocketing and hard for somebody, a working person, to live there. So, but some of the things that came out of was a real need for housing, which you can talk about that. And also that came out was a lot of people are interested in like over 55, some with apartments for people with disabilities.
Yeah.
Can Norwood, first you're going to address the housing issue, and then as a town, and to stay with the law, can Norwood tell a developer, we want you to build an over 55, or we are going to tell you who you can rent to or not? Is that an option for Norwood or not?
It is not, but it doesn't mean that we can't try to address those concerns in other ways. And so working within the limitations of the law, where we can't set age restrictions, we do recognize that there is a need for more flexible housing options for people in every stage of life. And very often, seniors have difficulty finding options that suit them at that stage of their lives. They're maybe looking to downsize. They don't need all of the space. A lot of homes in Norwood are older. And I don't know about you, at my house, it's a cape. The bathroom's on the second story.
Mine's old.
So that's true for a lot of people. They're looking for one-level living or elevator accessible buildings that are more suitable for their needs as they're thinking about where am I going to be as I age. So we did hear a lot of that, and while we can't set an age restriction just for 55 and over housing, we've been able to promote construction of buildings that have more fully accessible units, ADA units, and encourage construction of buildings that have elevator service. So one of the ways we do that is through building height. Building code, while complicated, generally has requirements that kick in when you've got a 3-story building of a certain size, that a certain percentage of them have to be accessible and there has to be an elevator. So, we could have gone in a few different directions with this. I've spoken to planning colleagues in other communities that decided, well, we really want to really dramatically reduce the impact on any one neighborhood. So what we're going to do is allow for all of our single family, residential neighborhoods to allow an option for them to be duplexes. Right, so that doesn't result in any new construction of really, taller buildings or larger communities, but it does spread that density over a large area. That may be the feedback that community got. It wasn't the feedback we got here. What we got here was we really like the single-family neighborhoods to be protected. The character of those neighborhoods is really important to us, and we really want to see that preserved. At the same time, there was some vacant, underutilized, formerly manufacturing or industrial land right by the train, like really close to the train stations. And people zeroed in on that for a few reasons. There's increased, tax benefits to the town to kind of developing an underutilized or vacant lot. There's some environmental cleanup that could happen as a result of some reinvestment in those areas. They're really close to the train stations and in some instances are downtown at Norwood Depot and Norwood Central, which helps to promote accessible kind of complete neighborhoods where if you perhaps don't drive a car, you can still be within easy access of the things that you need or perhaps even your job. That's important. But also the building heights in those areas are already around 3 stories. So a 3 or 4 story building is not inconsistent with the existing neighborhoods. And again, if you're looking to increase your supply of elevator accessible or ADA accessible units, those make perfect spots for a 3 or 4 story building where you're guaranteed to kind of get units that meet those needs.
On the ADA, one of our discussions we had at Planning Board, that when we were writing the bylaw was ADA. That in our community engagement, that came up a lot. That people with disabilities, need some housing for them. And we tried to put it in the bylaw, but you touched on anyone who builds a building has to build a few units that can quickly be converted to someone with a disability. If you could just touch on that. I think you said there was some had to be built and some had to be converted.
Yeah.
Just so we can address the people with disabilities, because I think that's important that we have available housing for them.
Yeah, I agree. So the building code and the AAB regs, Architectural Access Board, that our building commissioner regulates and ensures compliance with. Traditionally, the requirements for accessibility kick in when you have a building of a certain size. So I don't recall the number off the top of my head, but really, not a 3 or 4 unit building, something
Right.
a little bit larger. You have to have all of the units may be required to be convertible, so that if you move into a unit and you have a disability, or maybe you become disabled at some point, that the landlord has the ability to install grab bars or, the accommodations in your unit that allow you to access everything you need. And then a certain of them have to be fully accessible. So that looks like maybe a roll-in shower or wider door frames or lower countertops, specialty appliances that are within reach, no matter where you are or if you're in a wheelchair. So those are the types of accommodations that I think come with newer construction of housing. That you wouldn't necessarily get if you had really, really small scale, very low density development in the form of, some townhomes or duplexes. You wouldn't necessarily get the benefit of those requirements in the way that you do, giving some space in the zoning for a 3 or 4 story building that's, 20 units.
One of the things I found when this first started, when we got the first edict from the state, was affordability. And the state really didn't, I think, in this law address affordable. I think they only required 10% affordable, which to me doesn't make sense, but that's the law. I'm not the state. But what has Norwood done? What have we done in writing the new bylaw to address affordability? Are we staying with the state minimum, or
Right.
what have we done to and affordability is really it's not what, no one's putting up $500 a month apartments
No,
anymore. We
of course
understand the new norm is, $2,000 or whatever for one bedroom. But what have we done in the bylaw to address affordability, to make it more affordable?
Yeah, so the state law actually doesn't have any requirement
Oh, I thought they were 10%.
for
I'm sorry.
affordable
Yeah.
housing. Yeah, so and that's because this is it's a regional law, and the local markets, are all different. So it's hard to zero in on a percentage of affordable units that you can require that doesn't essentially kill development by being too costly. That figure is going to be different in any community. So there might be one community that has a really strong housing market, and land costs are what they are. To be able to support, every new building has to have 20% of its units be affordable. But another community, perhaps further away from the city or closer to 495, they might impose that same 20%, and what that would do is make any project there uneconomic, and no development would ever happen. And so that's the state's rationale for not requiring anything. What they did say is you can opt to require up to 10% of all new
that's where I come
units.
up with the 10%,
Yeah, that's where that 10% came from. You can require up to 10. If you want to exceed that 10, then you have to have a third party, professional conduct this economic feasibility analysis, essentially saying your requirement is suitable for your local market.
And we did that.
We did do that. So that was a big takeaway. We got, again, community outreach. Affordability was right up there as probably one of the top concerns. Is every housing type, right? Ownership, rental, whether it's an apartment complex or a single family home or any housing, all of it is just so much money, right? And,
Right.
and most people, who even those who already own their own homes say, well, gosh, I couldn't afford to buy in Norwood if I had to do it all over again today. So we heard that a lot. And so the response there was really to try to impose some affordability requirements so that any new housing that's constructed has some more options for income qualified families. So we wanted to require 20%. So we applied for it and received a grant from Mass Housing Partnership to be able to get that EFA done. So that study was done at no cost to the town. And the takeaway on that was that at projects that have 16 units or more, so something of a certain size where you get that economy of scale, can support the 20% requirement. So the bylaw that's being proposed requires 20% of all units in projects 16 units or greater have to be set aside as affordable units for income qualified households. 10% is required for any project from 8 to 15 units. That's the size that
Smaller,
can support
smaller
that.
developments, sure.
Developments can support that. Additionally, traditionally, the affordable units that we know are available to households that have 80% of the area median income. That's what our bylaw defines as affordable. That's a common state definition and federal definition for affordable. So whatever that area median income is, your gross household income is 80% of that or less. Most of the privately owned affordable housing we have in town is that 80%. The Housing Authority has some properties where, that AMI is lower, but really the lion's share of it is that 80%, which is still not cheap.
No.
It really isn't.
Not around
So,
here.
right now for those 80% affordable units, your gross rents are somewhere between $2,300 and $2,500 for a 2-bedroom. It's a lot of money, and we heard a lot of that, like even the affordable housing isn't affordable, how do we handle this? So the bylaw proposes a bonus or an incentive for any developer who elects to add, in addition to the 20%, an extra 5% of affordable housing at 50% of
Which is
AMI.
a big reduction.
It's a big reduction, right? And so those rents are even lower for households, earning at that lower income band. We don't have any of that housing here in Norwood. So if a developer elects to take advantage of that bonus, and if they did, they would receive an extra floor of building height in exchange for that fairly costly, investment in something that's going to produce a lot less operating income over the course of time. Their incentive is to be able to receive that extra floor of building height. If a developer elects to do that, then we'll have, for the first time, a supply of that 50% AMI housing.
Which I think is wonderful.
It would be a good accomplishment.
And those, just so people understand, when a developer puts up these apartment buildings, these affordable units are mixed throughout the development. They're not segregated, or no one knows who's affordable, who's not. I mean,
They have to be marketed fairly.
Marketed fairly.
There's
correctly.
usually a lottery where they really take close care to ensure that nobody is discriminated against, that there's no bias involved in the selection process. I personally review those marketing plans, and I review building plans to make sure that the affordable units are virtually indistinguishable from the rest. I've heard horror stories and seen firsthand in other communities where an affordable unit is developed with, lower grade materials.
Right, they cheaped out on them.
Yeah, exactly, and that does not fly here in Norwood. So any affordable units would be constructed at the same quality as the market ones within that development.
One of the things we heard from in our outreach to the public was from businesses, and obviously there is a housing shortage, and businesses in Norwood, particularly that we've talked to, are really looking for more housing for their employees, that they'll live, work, and play in your own backyard. And if you're going to pay, in my own opinion, if you're going to pay $2,000 for a 1-bedroom apartment, if you're going to pay for it in Waltham and you're going to pay for it in Norwood, you might as well pay for it in Norwood and walk to work and not have that commute and things like that. So the business community is really starving for housing for their employees, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we heard from a lot of business owners expressing that very same point. If you look at the figures statewide, Massachusetts is losing population to areas in the Sun Belt and down south where, especially after the pandemic and the rise of more remote work options, people are realizing, well, if I can live anywhere, I'm not going to live here and spend 50% or more of my take-home income on my housing, whether that's a mortgage payment or your rent. And so we've heard from a lot of companies, biotech companies, places where they've got skilled workers, earning decent salaries, that they are having a hard time attracting new employees, and they're having a hard time retaining their existing employees. And so that's a real problem that's going to affect our local economy. And there are some early signs that it's starting to.
And commute is one of the factors people, consider
right.
when they're looking for employment.
Yeah, who wants to sit on 95 for 2 hours a day?
Exactly.
I don't.
So we have the three train stations.
Yeah.
And we've determined that we're going to come in with a zone. There are three separate zones. If you could maybe just talk about each zone, where it is, so people have an idea of what the three zones are.
Yeah, so the bylaw proposes a district spread out over 3 sub-districts, one for each of the commuter rail areas. The dimensional requirements in each of those areas are slightly different because, again, those neighborhoods are different. And so we really want to be able to encourage redevelopment over time. It's not going to happen all at once. Some of it may not happen at all. But over time, you want to encourage development that's consistent with what's already there. And so, Windsor Gardens, because it's a little bit further removed from the center of town and goods and amenities, folks there are more likely to have more cars in their household, so the parking requirements are higher there than they are in town, where you can walk to shops and restaurants and jobs and the grocery store. Building heights are a little bit different. You can have a taller building in Norwood Depot and Norwood Central than at Windsor Gardens.
And where would Norwood Depot, the locus of?
Yeah, so Norwood Depot runs from the intersection of Lenox Street and Manhattan. It's only on the side of the street where Rockland Trust, Norwood Tire are, and it runs that entire side of the street up to Railroad.
So there's
and then hooks around to include the crossings at Central
So one Lenox
Railroad.
and the crossing are in it, but in reality, they're not going to get knocked down and rebuilt.
The crossings, no.
Yeah, no.
And that was strategic. Site selection here was really strategic to include a mix
You can
of...
talk about that too, as far as why these
Right. It
places
includes a
look
mix of parcels that are already multifamily housing, right? It makes sense to create cohesive neighborhoods where land uses are consistent with one another. And so by including areas that already have multifamily housing, one, you're protecting the town from realizing a volume of development of new housing that we can't support. Nobody's going to knock down the crossings or Avalon to reconstruct multifamily housing under this bylaw. There's no economic incentive provided here to do that. But they're included in the bylaw because it allows us to spread that unit capacity, over a larger area and create some consistency with existing neighborhoods. So that was one kind of site selection strategy. Another one was to choose underutilized or vacant manufacturing or industrial land as a means of kind of encouraging reinvestment in properties where that makes sense. And so there's probably about 3 parcels over the entire 78 acres, totaling less than 6 acres, where we'll see some redevelopment most likely within the next 3 to 5 years. And those are areas where we really wanted to kind of focus and encourage some reinvestment, increase the tax revenue for the town. Multifamily housing properties bring in a lot of tax revenue and significantly more than a vacant parking lot is going to, or a underutilized manufacturing parcel. increase the tax revenue, clean up the sites. Some of these, there's some environmental challenges just by virtue of being a historical industrial site. We see that with redevelopment. It's a good incentive, honestly, for the town to encourage redevelopment on those sites. But then also just kind of visually, enriching our neighborhoods with attractive buildings that are integrated nicely into the neighborhood, increase the amount of open space and landscaping, those kind of public streetscape amenities, and then give more foot traffic to the businesses that exist in our downtown areas. So Norwood Depot, the one difference of the zoning in that area is that the buildings can be closer to the sidewalk. It's in our central business district. That makes a lot of sense if a mixed-use building were to be constructed there, which is not required but is an option, with first floor, commercial or retail, and then residential above. It's much more activated streetscape in the sense that as a pedestrian, you could be walking down the sidewalk and see a shop or see a restaurant that you might like to pop in. Norwood Central, the front setbacks are much further back because on the other side of that street, Lenox Street, you've got single and two-family homes. And so to protect those residential abutters, those buildings on the other side of the street have to be at least 20 feet away from the sidewalk. And the tallest portion of the building has to be even further towards the train tracks in the back of the lot. Again, kind of protect those single-family homes on the opposite side of the street
from
the tunnel effect.
The tunnel effect,
Right. The
correct,
loss
good stuff,
of light and privacy. That district, the Norwood Central district.
Which is the largest district.
It's the largest district. No, it's not the largest district. Second largest district. Windsor Gardens.
Oh, Windsor Gardens,
is
yeah,
pretty big.
that's pretty big, yeah. But that's off by itself.
It is, yeah. So Norwood Central runs from Avalon down that side of Lenox Street down to the bottom of the hill by the train bridge, the bottom of Subway Hill. So that side of Lenox where it's between the train tracks and Lenox, that's all contained in the district, as well as two parcels on the other side of the train tracks on East Hoyle Street. One that's, the MBTA obviously owns its parcels. There's one that's owned by Steward at the moment and was used historically for parking by the hospital. And then the parcel next to that is where Auto Doctor is currently located. Most people don't realize that parcel is actually really deep. It goes all the way back and most of it's a vacant, deteriorating parking lot.
Yeah, I think, on the task force, and we took a lot of time to pick these parcels, and there's very little interference or with residential neighborhoods.
Right.
I mean, Lenox Street, yes, there's residential, but we've addressed. So each district can have its own set of rules, correct?
Right. Yep.
It's not one fits all. Each one, and
right.
It's written that way.
It's written
where
that way.
Where you can do some things on Central that you can't do at Depot, and vice versa, and things like that. It's tailored for each particular neighborhood, correct?
Exactly. That's the biggest challenge when you're writing any zoning is how do we encourage growth in the ways that are good for our community and meet the needs of our community, whether they're fiscal needs or, personal housing needs. But at the same time, preserve what we have that works and that we love. And any zoning has to really try to do both of those things and balance those interests. Being able to really tailor our zoning to the subdistricts allows us to better maintain that balance of encouraging growth in the ways that make sense and meet our needs, develop more affordable housing, increase the housing supply, put housing closer to goods and services, make it more accessible, more sustainable development where people are not necessarily driving as much to ease our traffic issues, right? But then also at the same time, not really fundamentally change the appearance of our neighborhoods, not negatively impact residential abutters and the investments they've made in their own homes and properties. So being able to tailor for us was being able to use that local control to our tremendous advantage.
I think Norwood, and we've talked about this, Norwood was, we were in pretty good shape as far as what's there now to comply with this law. We have the Lenox Street, the corridor. We have the vacant lots on the other side of Lenox. We had Windsor Gardens, which is already a huge multifamily,
Right.
complex. Norwood Depot, there's some multifamily over there as well. So we were positioned fairly well to handle this. If I was Dover or Sherborne or some of these other towns that don't have what we have as an infrastructure or existing, they're looking at some big changes. And I think that, again, Norwood was pretty much set up for this.
Yeah, I agree. I think, our historical development pattern here in Norwood has always been in favor of working families. We've always provided a range of housing options for people at all income levels. I mean, a lot of our housing was built and originally constructed as workforce housing, for the bird factory or the tanneries, up on Railroad Ave, right? So we've always had more dense housing. We've always had more housing options. We have more rentals. But a lot of communities across the state have not done that, right? You have a lot of communities where really only the wealthiest can afford to live on, 1-2 acre minimum lot sizes. As a result, housing production is down. We've got one of the lowest housing production rates across the country, which of course contributes to the cost issues that we're seeing. I think if more communities had some percentage of the development that Norwood has had, we probably wouldn't be in this situation and this law wouldn't need to exist. But here we are. And what that means for Norwood, I think, is that we are really going to see a lot less development as a result of our zoning. We already have multifamily housing. We are already, any development we see here is going to be redevelopment. There's no, wide open spaces and forests and, farmland that's going to get constructed for housing as a result of this law. But there may be communities where that's the case, and that's going to be a big change. In Norwood, that change, again, it's been strategic. We're really kind of focusing the redevelopment potential on sites that we know we can meet the demand for, that we've got capacity. Places that we really want to see it.
And this is all redevelopment.
All redevelopment.
And one of the questions that came up throughout our community involvement was, well, we already have Windsor Gardens, which is a lot of apartments. That's in one of the new districts. We have Avalon and Regal Press, which is in the district. There are already a lot of apartments there. Norwood Crossing, 1 Lenox. Don't those apartments count? Doesn't the state take into consideration, we've already have these apartments, so we should be exempt? Or maybe just talk about why they don't count and what the state is what they're looking for versus what's there now.
Yeah, so they don't count, but that's because they can't count. This is a zoning mandate. This is about us revising the rules of what can be built and where. It's not about counting units on the ground. It's not about counting, units that are going to be built. It's really about the rules and not the units themselves. And so that we have existing multifamily housing, it benefits us because it reduces kind of the impact of these rules. Again, if there was vacant space, a green space, never developed parcels,
Clear cutting of trees.
that had, exactly, never been allowed to construct any multifamily housing before, and there was all this pent-up demand for it, and now all of a sudden you've changed the rules. You're probably going to see a lot of development of multifamily housing. That unit capacity figure for your town, whatever that figure is, you're probably going to see development at a much closer amount to that capacity than Norwood will. We've already allowed for multifamily housing. We have multifamily housing on the ground. Again, who would knock down Avalon or the Crossings only to construct multifamily? That doesn't make sense. It won't happen. So. I think in some ways it does benefit us because we've already been doing this.
Exactly, and you know, like I said, some of those surrounding towns are panicking.
Yeah,
They're going to see a lot of change. We will see some change.
we will see some.
There's no doubt about it. There's, you know, I look at it, my own, you know, personal view is that if, you know, these apartments are done correctly, you know, in the right location, they're fine. And you know, these people that live in apartments are gonna walk to work. They're gonna walk uptown. They're gonna support our local businesses, and they do. And my thought always is that businesses will find people. You know, people, you know, not the other way around. Not people go to, if there's a nail salon that somebody likes, you're not going to move to that town because of that nail salon. But if there's a lot of people there, that nail salon is going to find those people and move in. And you know, I think that you know, Sarah, on all your work on you and your team have put together on this bylaw, I think it does work for Norwood. And just in conclusion, is there anything questions that I might have missed or that you'd like to talk about that we didn't touch on, or and just where we go from what's the final steps here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, you know, really, we a lot of these elements in the bylaw are tied right back to what we heard in our community engagement. You know, right down to concerns about traffic. You know, we've written this bylaw to encourage redevelopment of housing geared towards people who are less car dependent, you know, and we require less parking, you know, for that reason. Open space was another big priority that I want to make sure people know that, you know, we were responsive to in this bylaw. We've got higher requirements for open space. We've got incentives for stacked or underground parking, with all of that surface parking kind of preserved for open space. Sustainable development, sustainability was a priority we heard a lot of folks talk about, and so making sure that there are strong requirements for stormwater management and protection of groundwater is something that was built into the bylaw. So I really want people to feel, you know, confident that a lot of those needs that they express in this process, we've tried really hard to make sure the bylaw reflects that.
And I think redevelopment is the key word. You know, the redevelopment is taking an underutilized parcel that at one time was vibrant, is no longer, breathing some new life into
Making
it.
it
Some
better.
new, you know, we drive by a vacant lot or an empty building, and it just sits there. And so the underlying district is, for the most part, like on the North Central, is manufacturing.
Yeah.
So if someone still wanted to use manufacturing,
They
they
still
could,
could.
correct?
Absolutely.
Maybe you
That's
could
not
touch
gonna
on that,
change.
that this is an overlay district, but if someone came in wanted to put up another factory, they still have that ability, correct?
Yes. So the base zoning will stay put, and if the market, you know, supports a manufacturing use, that could either begin operating or continue to operate. None of our existing property owners in any of these districts are obligated to make any changes. All this does is add more possibilities for what could be done with the property over time.
Another option for them.
Another option for them. So no business has to convert anything or go out of business. It's just, in a lot of cases, this is going to increase the values of those properties, again, because the demand for multifamily housing in our market is very strong. But it doesn't compel any particular sort of action.
I think that's important, that
Yeah.
that no one is required to put up any apartments.
No.
This is not, they're not required. It's just another
No.
tool in the toolbox.
And we've heard from business owners within the proposed districts. You know, one spoke at the planning board public hearing on Monday night saying, you know, I've got the largest parcel within my sub-district, and I have a business that I've invested a lot of money in over the years, and it's thriving. You know, we've got over 100 employees. We're really successful. I have no interest in selling my property to a multifamily housing developer, but I would really like it if there was more housing within the district for my employees. Again,
Yep.
you know, I don't want them to not be able to continue to work here because it takes them an hour to get here, or the cost of the rent plus the commute from, you know, other areas isn't doable. So, you know, there's benefits to this across the board, but there's really no.
To that point,
No motivation.
whatever happens to the hospital, hopefully that will work itself out, but they're going to need housing, a lot of it.
A lot of it.
And it would be nice for people to be able to roll out of bed and, walk across the street or down the street
Absolutely.
and get a cup of coffee and then go to work.
Well, and again, thinking on a regional level, if more of that type of development happens across all of the towns in eastern Massachusetts, you might see, the idea, at the macro level is, that person who was driving from Waltham to Norwood is now no longer another car on 95. And replicated, again, on a regional basis. The idea is this more sustainable, transit-oriented development where you've got people living and working and playing and dining and all that in their own communities, which is something we need to think about looking into the future.
Great. So I'll just give you the last word. If there's anything you think that we have not talked about that I missed, you can say it now. If not, we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, so we've got a handful of other events coming up before town meeting. We encourage people to attend. The planning department is, open Monday through Friday, and we're always available by call or email or stopping by with questions. I'd be happy to chat with any resident about this. We have a website on the town's website with an FAQ section that's really detailed, so hopefully if anybody has questions, they can go get some information there. But mostly I just want to give a really strong acknowledgement of the hard work that the task force and the planning board put into this. It's really been a lot of work, kind of drafting something so quickly.
Well,
We have a deadline,
right.
so people really kind of kept showing up and put a lot of effort into it. And to all of the members of the public that we've interacted with so far, really to be commended for kind of their civic engagement and participation.
So
It's really important.
Town meeting is
March 21st.
March 21st.
Yeah.
And if someone wanted to take a look at the bylaw, which is 40-something pages long,
Yeah.
could they find it on the website? Can they come into the office and get a copy of it?
Yes, to both of those.
To both of those.
Yeah.
So there's, no excuse for someone not to be informed. We are going to also talk at the town meeting members
Yep, there's
information
a
night.
town meeting info session
That'll be
on
there.
February 28th
Yep.
at 6:30, I believe, but double check the town website for all of the updated information. I'll be hosting an open mic night online. It'll be a virtual meeting for
Oh,
people.
good. Can I bring my guitar?
Yeah, maybe. That'll be on Google Meet on March 11th at 7 p.m. Informal, not a presentation, just a chance for people to log in, say hello, ask questions.
This Friday.
That's March 11th. And then we also have an open house at Town Hall on Friday, February 16th. And that is a similar informal, casual event just to come by
9 to
Memorial
11 in the
Hall,
morning?
9 to 11 in the morning, ask questions, take a look at the maps, get a copy of the bylaw, have coffee and a donut on us. And again, always available by
Great.
call or email. But
Beautiful.
thank you for all your hard work on this, Ernie.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Again, Sarah Dixon, she's the town planner and director of community development. A big part of writing the bylaw for the new 3A, and I thank you.
It's been my pleasure.
Good night.